Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. In the previous video you saw Dane and Herman approaching the teleportation gate that Arabella had meticulously prepared for Dane. As the butler Herman gazed at the teleportation gate, his eyes widened. He told the young master that it was truly impressive to see something like this in person. Dane replied with a smile, explaining that it was the teleportation gate his eldest sister had prepared. Gazing at the intricate and complex design of the gate, he was impressed with his sister's efforts, now understanding why she had spent an entire year working on it. The butler then asked if the teleportation would be activated upon entering, and Dane smiled, thinking it would. His mind drifted back to when the gate was being built, wondering just how much effort his sister had put into it, for unlike other magic spells that could be triggered by simply rearranging codes, teleportation required precise energy transfer, and the gate she had installed was flawless, meeting all the necessary conditions for immediate use. Dane silently marveled at his sister's work before his departure. Herman, with a slightly saddened expression, asked Dane to please take care and to make sure to stay healthy. Dane replied, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Seeing the young man's eyes welling up, Dane slowly walked towards the base of the teleportation gate because he remembered his sister's words. Just channel magic energy into the gate to activate it. Determined, Dane focused and began channeling a surge of magical energy, directing it toward his feet. And as he did, the gate suddenly emitted a soft glow, and in the next moment Dane's figure vanished within the shimmering light. Time passed quickly, and the scene shifted to the capital city, Artenia, where Dane found himself riding a horse at the city gates, and he observed the bustling crowds. His expression brightened as he thought he had arrived at the entrance to the capital of Artenia. At that moment, a knight raised his hand in greeting, recognizing Dane's identity, and he announced that he had been waiting for him, introducing himself as Luik Asmar, the captain of the Thermion family's 1st Cavalry Squad. Dane, slightly surprised but still composed, responded, acknowledging him. Although he didn't know much about this man, he felt a little awkward at the personal attention from the captain. Noticing Dane's hesitation, Captain Luik continued, stating that from now on they would be escorting him. He then turned to his subordinates, instructing them to make sure the route was secure, and the two underlings responded in unison, "Yes, Captain." "Then let's head out," Luik said, and Dane nodded in acknowledgement, though inside he was reflecting on the situation, finding it strange. He never imagined he would actually step foot in the heart of the Althian Empire, a place he had once despised, and now he was there as a promising figure himself. As Dane walked along the road leading to the mansion, he could hear the lively sounds of merchants calling out, advertising magic frozen parfait for only 1 silver coin. The vibrant atmosphere caught Dane's attention, and he admired the scene around him, thinking about the many strange things. He hadn't expected the capital to be so lively. Just as he was thinking this, Captain Luik turned his head toward him and reminded him that the Thermion family estate was just over there, indicating that they had arrived. Dane followed his gaze and was immediately struck by the grandeur of the estate. He thought the mansion was truly magnificent, unable to hold back his admiration. However, before he could take in more details, a strange sensation crept over him, for he felt as though someone was watching him from behind, an unsettling feeling like being followed by an unseen presence. Dane wondered if it was just his imagination, deciding to put it aside for now. Following the knights, Dane quickly made his way to the main entrance, where on either side servants stood in an orderly fashion, greeting him respectfully with a unison, "Welcome, young master Dane Sogres." Dane nodded in acknowledgement and replied, thanking them for the warm welcome. He then added that their formation was impressive, noting the impeccable manners and etiquette, exuding a natural and powerful aura quite different from the south where he was from. After his brief admiration, Dane proceeded to face Duke Thermion, whom he had last met when he was very young. Upon standing before him, Dane immediately knelt on one knee and respectfully greeted him. The Duke responded with a broad smile and a nod, remarking on how long it had been and asking how Dane was, and if the journey had been tough, inviting him to come rest inside. As they walked together into the mansion, the Duke took a moment to observe Dane and commented on how completely different he looked from 7 years ago. He stated that among children Dane's age, and even those a year or two older, there was no one who could compare to him, adding that Arkan must be very proud, and the Duke gave Dane a friendly pat on the shoulder as a compliment. Dane responded modestly, saying the Duke was too kind. Upon hearing Duke Thermion's words, Dane nodded in appreciation of the thoughtful arrangements, thanking him, and then asking how Layla had been doing lately, curious about the girl. Duke Thermion responded with a chuckle, saying she was fine, but then inquired if there was some trouble between Dane and Layla. The comment left Dane confused, and he asked what the Duke meant, his tone filled with curiosity. Seeing Dane's confusion, Duke Thermion sighed, explaining that recently, whenever he mentioned Dane's name, she seemed a bit upset. He speculated that it might be the pressure of the upcoming entrance exams, but knowing Layla, she would get through it easily, and he chuckled, then looked thoughtful, still wondering what was really bothering her. Dane, still unsure, responded that he would ask Layla directly and figure it out, though in his mind a thought lingered about whether it could be because she was reaching puberty. Duke Thermion, understanding that it might be best for young people to sort things out themselves, nodded, agreeing to leave that for later and just reminding Dane not to be too harsh with her, adding that he would understand in time. He then told Dane to go rest, mentioning that a servant would show him to his room. A servant arrived and guided Dane to his room. Before leaving, the servant bowed and wished him well, and Dane replied with a nod. Once the door was fully closed, he took a moment to observe the lavish room and mumbled to himself that he would be staying there for about a week to prepare for the entrance exams, noting that the guest room was a bit too luxurious. He planned to unpack his things first, then head to the training area afterward. Dane casually tossed his bag aside, but before he could organize his belongings, a figure with pink hair emerged from inside the wardrobe and spoke up, saying she would take him to the training area and asking why it had taken him so long, as she had been waiting forever. Hearing the familiar voice, Dane eagerly turned around and responded cheerfully, greeting Layla and asking how she had been. Contrary to Dane's excitement, Layla's mood seemed somewhat annoyed, just as old man Duke Thermion had warned. She replied that she was fine, perfectly fine, but then asked if he didn't have something to say to her, marching toward him as if ready to settle a score. Dane, sensing trouble, backed away a few steps, nervously stammering and asking what she meant. "Why didn't you write me a letter?" Layla suddenly shouted, and at last realization dawned on Dane, and he understood why his close friend was so upset. His eyes filled with regret as he explained that he had meant to reply but kept forgetting, apologizing. "Sorry, that's it," Layla retorted, her voice rising. Dane's face twisted with unease as he tried again, saying he had come straight there and had to prepare to leave his family, so he hadn't been in the right state of mind for anything else, asking for her forgiveness just this once. Layla puffed her cheeks, turning her face away in silent protest. Recognizing how angry she was, Dane sighed in defeat, and to calm her down, he reluctantly offered to do whatever she wanted to make it up to her. "Really?" she asked, finally glancing at him with renewed interest. Dane silently reminded himself to just get out of this mess first, but wondered what she wanted. Aloud, he asked what she wanted him to do. With a gleam of enthusiasm in her eyes, Layla promptly suggested a little sparring match. "A sparring match?" Dane echoed in confusion, and "Yes, fight me," Layla reiterated, her smile widening. Though Dane found the request a bit peculiar, switching to Layla's perspective, seeing the confident posture of the protagonist, a sense of pride welled up in her as she spoke, asking if he was sure he wouldn't regret it. She pointed out that while she might look the same, she had grown so much stronger that it was incomparable to before, adding that she wasn't the same girl who had learned how to release magic from him anymore. Observing her confidence, he couldn't help but realize how much she must have matured over the past 7 years. Thinking about it, as if remembering something, Dane asked, speaking of which, if she had won some kind of competition that she had mentioned in her last letter. On the other side, Layla's eyes lit up with joy when she heard Dane bring it up, asking if he still remembered. Dane recalled Layla had won the Dante Prize, which was a tough contest for young people. Layla replied that if he had been there, they would have faced off in the finals. She smiled, saying it was a pity they hadn't. Excited, Dane suggested they settle it now, but Layla hesitated, worried about his entrance exam and possible injury. Dane dismissed her worries with a confident wave of his hand, assuring her not to worry about him. Seeing his firm response, Layla realized there was no reason to hold back. She agreed, suggesting they have their match first thing in the morning since it was late that day. Time passed quickly until the next morning when, in a spacious courtyard, Dane and Layla stood ready for their sparring session just as they had promised. When they discussed weapons for their match, Dane hesitated and asked if they would use training weapons. Layla was surprised and asked if he still used bladeless weapons. Dane explained that he didn't, but since it was just a light spar practice, weapons would be fine. Dane argued that even skilled warriors couldn't predict everything and wondered what if someone got hurt. Dane's serious tone surprised her, but she assured him her family had the best healer. Dane then asked what would happen if even a healer couldn't help, leaving Layla unsure how to respond. Seeing her reaction, Dane added firmly that if she wanted to wield a real blade, she must think that way. Layla let out an exasperated sigh, clearly irritated, exclaiming that it was just a sparring match and asking why he was being so serious. Finally, she conceded, shaking her head and agreeing to use training weapons, and she turned toward the waiting attendants and instructed them to bring the training weapons over. They responded quickly, fetching the requested equipment. From Dane's perspective, as he watched Layla's current demeanor, a faint smile crossed his lips, for indeed she had grown into a proud, confident young woman, just as the rumors had claimed. Many believed she would soon rival the prowess of her two brothers, who were rising stars among the Althean Empire's knights. Perhaps the Duke Thermion family had birthed its first female head of household, because the moment Layla had learned to release her mana had marked a major turning point. Dane mused quietly to himself, feeling a mix of admiration and respect. Meanwhile, Layla had similar thoughts running through her mind, thinking about Dane. Because of him, she had been able to grasp the basics of controlling magical energy much faster than her peers, and now she had two men accompanying her. Reflecting on this, she glanced at Dane and said with a determined tone that she had been waiting for this day for so long, and asked if he would be upset if she won. At that moment a servant arrived carrying 2 training weapons, announcing respectfully that the weapons were there. Layla nodded in acknowledgement, casually tossing a wooden spear to Dane, and as soon as it landed in his hands, he swung it a few times to gauge its weight and balance, murmuring to himself that, as expected since it was a training weapon, it felt light. Bracing himself immediately into a combat stance, he asked if they should get started. Seeing this, Layla tightened her grip around her sword and responded with a confident nod, agreeing to begin, and so they both stood face to face, staring intently at each other, neither making the first move. Turning inward, Layla reminded herself that thankfully she had faced spear-wielding opponents before, even fighting one during the Dante Cup, and it hadn't been too difficult. A spear had great reach, but its power diminished drastically in close quarters, and if that was the case, she just needed to close the gap quickly. With that thought driving her actions, she gathered all her strength into her legs and launched herself forward like a speeding arrow, aiming to get as close as possible to Dane and neutralize his advantage. When she was nearly within reach, Layla thrust her sword straight ahead with force, but just as the tip was about to make contact with him, his figure vanished abruptly, leaving her movement frozen mid-strike. She wondered where he had disappeared to all of a sudden, right before feeling the wooden spear gently pressing against her hand from the side, causing her to gasp. She stammered, her eyes wide, asking how long he had been there. Beside her, Dane responded calmly with a tone of mild reproach, stating that it was a good thing this was just a practice weapon, as something serious could have happened if it had been a real one. His words left Layla still grappling with the swift defeat, mumbling in confusion that she was sure her sword had already touched him. Back to Dane. Seeing the frustrated expression on his close friend's face, he offered a suggestion to go again, starting over, and advised her that using the same strategy wouldn't work, so she should be careful with her movements this time. Hearing these words, Layla instinctively gripped her sword tighter, reminding herself that it had been so long since they had met, and maybe she had gotten too nervous this time and she wouldn't hold back at all. As this thought crossed her mind, her eyes caught sight of Duke Thermion observing them from the balcony above, and naturally Dane also sensed his presence. He even deduced the reason behind the Duke's silent observation, thinking to himself that Duke Thermion was there to see the final results, and he understood his intentions well. After Layla had won the Dante Cup, she had poured her heart into training, and he was worried. Today he would relieve him of those worries. Switching to Layla's perspective, the realization that her father was watching only fueled her determination even further. She declared with fiery resolve that Dane should get ready because her father was watching too, and she was going all out. Dane responded with a calm nod. With nothing more to say, Layla gripped her sword tightly and swung it with all her strength, and her unleashed 2 sharp wind blades, hurtling directly at Dane. However, he deftly spun his spear like a windmill, effortlessly dispersing her attack, yet this was exactly the opportunity Layla had been waiting for, and she dashed forward to close the distance, calling out how that wasn't so easy now as her sword arced toward him. But Dane's eyes reflected a hint of disappointment as he calmly uttered that she still had a long way to go and should give it everything she had. Meanwhile, Duke Thermion, as he was known to some, remained silently engrossed, scrutinizing every movement in the battle unfolding before him. So far the duel between the two seemed evenly matched, their skills clashing in perfect balance, and yet a strange unease loomed in the air. The smile Dane had worn earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by the serious countenance of a warrior preparing for a real battle. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.